Welcome to the Young Money Podcast with Ross Murray. This episode of the Young Money Podcast is brought to you by More Time Financial, a financial planning, money management and financial education business helping young Australians to make smarter decisions with their money.
In today's episode of the Young Money Podcast, we're talking about the importance of estate planning for young Australians, as well as busting some common myths that come with putting in place a will, being in a relationship, and having an up-to-date estate plan. I have with me a guest on today's episode. My guest's name is Tara Lucke. Tara is currently a freelance lawyer and the co-founder of a legal firm named View Legal. After spending 10 years working at a large corporate law firm in Brisbane City, Tara decided to move to the Gold Coast and take a step back from the corporate world to gain some much-needed work-life balance. She currently now works as a freelance consultant to financial planners, accountants and other lawyers to ensure that their clients have an up-to-date and accurate estate plan. Be sure to listen towards the end of the episode where Tara shares what it was like to climb the corporate ladder as a lawyer and why what you see on the TV show Suits is nothing what it's like to be a lawyer in real life. I hope you enjoy the episode.
Thanks, Ross. So my name is Tara Lucke. I'm 32 and I'm a lawyer.
Excellent. And if you want to start things off with maybe a horror story or like some kind of worst case scenario that you've seen when estate planning has gone wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. So I specialise in estate planning and I see it all the time, how bad it can be if you don't have proper estate planning. So I guess my sort of message for your listeners is estate planning doesn't have to be hard. Yeah. And for a lot of people, we can basically get a set and forget structure in place so that you've got that peace of mind. One thing that a lot of people don't know is that even if you don't have a will, you do have an estate plan. Okay. So the government gives everybody a default estate plan, which, sounds pretty good in theory, except most of the time it doesn't actually achieve what people want. Yeah. So it's a really good idea to actually do some proper planning and get your estate plan sorted the way that you want so that your wealth passes to your loved one or purposes that you care a lot about.
Okay.
So in terms of war stories, I think they come up a lot for young people because there's a bit of a misconception with younger people, and I'm sort of, even people in my age demographic in their 30s and 40s, because I think a lot of people think, it's like an old person thing to get your estate plan. So a lot of young people just don't bother with it. Yeah. And that's unfortunately where we see a lot of the war stories and worst case scenarios arise because they just think it doesn't apply to them. So most people, even if they don't feel like they have a lot of equity or assets now, they're in that accumulation phase, if they pass away, they will have assets because of their super and the life insurance that usually comes automatically with super.
Yeah.
So I've seen a lot of war stories, even if you've got like a single person in their 20s or 30s, no dependents, if they pass away and they haven't addressed their superannuation nominations, it can be a real mess about where their money goes, and that can be a couple of $100,000.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
There's been a few cases recently where a young person has passed away, they haven't nominated what to do with their super, and the parents are separated or divorced, and what ends up happening is there's an absolute mess between the parents about who's getting what money, and while the intention might be that the super goes equally between the parents, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
And there's been instances where one parent has just taken all the super money because they can legally do that if you don't get your nominations sorted. And then what actually happens is they end up in court and then they're fighting over it. And you know who gets the super money? Neither parent. It goes to the lawyers who are litigating in fees. So what an absolute waste of money. And I'm sure that would not be where the young fellow in that case wanted his money to go.
Definitely.
He never wanted to go to lawyers.
Well, I think that's a really good example because, as you said, young, no dependents, no not much money, or he didn't think he had much money, like that's a perfect example of someone saying, I don't need a will. All that kind of stacks up. Where in that case, you're saying, like, it will go nowhere. Like, no one gets it, no one wins. So
it's an absolute shame.
Yeah, definitely.
And like, how long does it take to do a super nomination? Like 10 minutes?
If that?
Yeah, 2 minutes
exactly.
And a bit of a chat with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think if we took a step back from that, what is estate planning? Because when I speak to, especially a lot of young people, I'm not sure where their mind goes, but it's definitely, there's a lot of myths. There's, as you said, I didn't need it when I'm old. Like, they don't even know what estate planning is. So what is estate planning?
Okay, there's a couple of aspects to estate planning. So there's obviously dealing with the event of when you pass away, and that's when people are looking at their will, or if they don't have a will, there's the intestacy rules, which the government says this is where your money goes, and we can touch on those later.
Yeah.
Also your super nominations. So those documents are needed dealing with estate planning for death.
Okay.
But there's also estate planning for while you're still alive, but if you've lost capacity to look after yourself. So nominating people to manage your finances, make sure there's enough money there, that any insurances that you have are used in the right way to make sure there's enough money to care for you. And then also making sure that the right people can actually make your medical and lifestyle decisions for you as well, if you can't look after yourself.
And that's in the form of, obviously, an enduring power of attorney.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right.
So we've got a will, which is obviously when you die, then that sets out where your money will go. And then you've got an enduring power of attorney, which will set out who is going to make those decisions if you can't make it for yourself.
Exactly right. And again, for a lot of young people, they really should have the power of attorney in place, because what happens if you don't is your family members have to apply in Queensland to the Civil Appeals Tribunal,
yep.
And whoever's just willing to stick their hand up to the job usually gets it. And that may not actually align with who you feel is going to be best to make those decisions, particularly some of those medical decisions. It's a really value-based process, so I think for a lot of people it's critical to have certainty around the right people making those decisions for you.
And have you been on the other side of that when you've had to deal with cases where obviously someone gets appointed that shouldn't have been appointed, and then have to try and get out of that?
Yeah, absolutely. You really can't. Once the appeals tribunal nominates somebody, if you haven't done a proper power of attorney, there's not a lot you can do, and it causes huge amounts of tension in the family. Because they'll all have a different idea about what is the right thing and who's best to make those decisions. And unfortunately, if you didn't set those out while you had full capacity, everyone is left with a different point of view, and they can't ever go back to saying, well, we know this is what you would have wanted. It's always he says, she says, and it just causes so much unnecessary tension in an already really difficult time.
Yeah, I think the way we try and explain it to people is, so there's going to be the emotional pain if there's death. Obviously that's just a non-negotiable. We can't help with that. There's going to be the emotional pain, but we can help with the financial pain. So we can make sure that the documents are in place, the life insurance is in place, make sure all those boxes are ticked. So that's just one less thing that your family has to deal with if you pass away.
Yeah, it is already a difficult time. So why complicate it with difficult legal processes? Like, everything is so much harder for your family and friends to sort out if you didn't plan it properly, and adding extra tension when emotions are already high. It's like getting your estate planning sorted is not a difficult process. It's pretty straightforward, and for a lot of people, you can just get it done, basically set and forget. I suggest that you do sort of look at it for 5 minutes every year just to check in, but unless there's major life events changing, you don't have to keep revisiting it. So just get it sorted.
And you'd probably know the stats more than me, but there's obviously something ridiculous how many people don't have a will in Australia. Why do you think that is? Like, what stops people from doing it? Why is it the last thing on people's list?
I think people think it's harder than it is. And look, no one wants to think about it, even though, what do they say? There's like 2 certainties in life, death and taxes.
Yeah.
So it is relevant for every single person, but I think no one wants to think about their mortality, and there can be a bit of stigma about if you actually sit down and address it, then maybe you're inviting death and trouble into your life. But I mean, I actually find it's the opposite with Parkinson's law. It's the people who, and maybe the same with insurance, the people who actually get their insurances and their estate plan sorted, they never have to rely on them, or, at least not for a really, really long time. Yeah. And it's the people who didn't bother prioritising it that need to rely on it, and then it's too late. Yeah. So, look, and I think also someone said to me the other day, oh my God, just sitting with in a stuffy old room with like a grey-haired lawyer who, it's so boring, and it doesn't have to be like that with estate planning. Yeah. These days getting your wills done is a lot quicker of a process. Definitely. And I think with my clients, once we go through it, they actually just get that peace of mind. You don't have to, every time you think about it, cringe. It's sorted.
Yeah, definitely. So on that, with the clients that you work with, is there a certain time when people should get a will and get their estate planning sorted, where it's just a non-negotiable?
Look, definitely if you get married or have children. So I have this thing that whenever my friends have a child, I give them a will with a testamentary trust in it. Yep. And look, I'm not always the most popular at the baby shower. Turning up with my will, but I just absolutely think it's so important. So look, everyone should have a will, but especially if you have children, and especially needing a will with a testamentary trust in it.
Okay. So if you try and explain that in layman's terms, just run us through what that is, a testamentary trust.
If we just come up with a sample client scenario, young husband and wife, and they've got like a child who's 2 years old, something like that. So if our wife passes away, rather than her leaving the assets to her husband in his own name, what happens is the assets go into a bit of a bucket called a testamentary trust for the husband who survived and their child. And it still looks and feels like their money. They've got total control over it, but it's technically held in a separate structure called a trust. Okay. Why bother with this extra trust? 2 reasons: asset protection and tax. So if I go into the asset protection, there's a couple of areas to that. So if we look at the statistics, men who have lost their wives are really likely to re-partner. Okay. It's something like an 80% re-partner rate. And particularly the older you get, I think the higher it is. But anyway, I don't know. I won't comment on why that is.
Sure.
But it's really common, especially with younger people, that they might re-partner in the future. If the inheritance goes into that testamentary trust and there are new relationships with the surviving spouse, the inheritance is segregated and protected away from any issues with that new relationship. So if there is a divorce or a relationship breakdown, then the inheritance from the first relationship is kept away from that. So that can be really valuable to make sure basically that the children are protected, that money is going to ultimately be there for the children if you pass away. So you know by using the trust that your kids will ultimately get that money when they come of age. Okay. The other sort of asset protection point of it is if both of our young couple have passed away, leaving their minor 2-year-old, the testamentary trust is great from protecting children from their own financial immaturity. Sure. So obviously, children who are under 18 don't get control over their money. Yep. If you don't use this trust, then the children get their money when they turn 21. Okay.
That's the default?
That's the default position without a trust.
Okay.
If you use the trust, then the children don't get their money when they turn 21. You get to nominate people that you trust, like it might be your parents or close family members or friends, and they get to decide when the children are financially mature enough to control the money.
Yeah.
So when I'm saying that the kids get their money or don't get it, they will of course benefit the whole way through. Their school fees, their living expenses are all paid for, but the kids don't get to make financial decisions about the money.
Yeah.
So I think most people will have come across instances where there's an inheritance, 21-year-old gets control over that amount and they just blow it. And they lived, to regret it years down the track. So the Testamentary Trust prevents that from happening. You get to put people that you trust in charge of deciding when the children get financial control. And so basically protecting them from their financial immaturity.
Yeah, I've seen a few cases of that where, unfortunately, the father passed away, and exactly that. The son was, I think, 19 or 20 and inherited a couple $100,000. And after a couple of months, it was not there anymore.
Oh, and it's terrible because if that money is protected and invested appropriately, it can just be a game changer and set them up for life.
Definitely. Versus,
just blowing it all. So testamentary trusts are really good for that. For people who are in business, they're also excellent. If you have got some bankruptcy exposure, and look, when I say bankruptcy exposure, anyone who is a director of a trading business or a listed company or a sole trader has a bit of bankruptcy exposure compared to the person on the street. So doesn't mean that you're going to become bankrupt. Most people don't. But if you have the inheritance separate in that testamentary trust bucket, then it's just not even up for grabs if bankruptcy happens. So you're keeping the inheritance protected from those types of risks.
Definitely.
So asset protection is one of the main drivers for using testamentary trusts. Tax is the other. So I won't bore everybody by going into the exact tax details, but basically the income that is earned on investing the inheritance can be tax-free to minor children.
Okay.
So if we go back to our scenario of husband and wife, and the wife passes away and leaves her husband and the 2-year-old, without the trust, if she leaves her husband, what's a good amount of life insurance? 700,000 super and life insurance.
Yep.
Maybe that's a bit high for what most people have. But if, say, he's got that money and he invests it, earns a bit of an income, that would all be taxed at his marginal rate. So if he's also working to support the family, and then he's got this extra income, taxed at his marginal rate, it might even push him up a tax bracket.
Yep.
And then he's got to pay tax and then use the after-tax money to pay for the schooling and education and everything like that. If they have a testamentary trust, they invest that inheritance, they can allocate tax-free amounts to the child. So basically using pre-tax income to pay for the schooling, living expenses. It's about $20,000 per year per child, and then just your normal tax rates from there. So people with testamentary trusts, if they do have an instance where their spouse passes away, they're using pre-tax money to pay for the schooling expenses. And that's year on year.
Yeah, definitely.
And then it's generation on generation. So when that 2-year-old becomes an adult and then has children of their own, they get it again.
Oh, right. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
okay.
So these are the types of structures where wealthy people use them, and that's how they stay wealthy because they're paying so much less tax than anybody else. Traditionally, they have just been the domain of wealthy people because getting this type of strategy advice hasn't been accessible. But these days, I feel like everybody should have them. They're not expensive to implement.
Yep.
You don't have to worry about managing or the compliance of these trusts until somebody dies. So it's not a headache, or you don't even have to, it's not even a headache anyway, but you don't even have to worry about it unless somebody dies. But if the worst happens, then you're utilising the structures that are there to give yourself a head start.
So you mentioned small business owners or business owners being at risk. What are your recommendations for any business owners, anyone that is has a public company or private company, partnership, sole trader, whatever it is, what's your recommendation in terms of estate planning?
So business owners really should be getting their estate planning done for a couple of reasons, especially if they're working on setting their asset protection structure up appropriately while they're alive. So if you are working on, okay, well, we'll put the house in the low risk spouse name, the person who's not carrying on the business. We might use a family trust to run the business or a company. You don't want somebody to die and then upset and unwind all of that asset protection. So if you've deliberately put the house in your low risk spouse name and then they pass away and they leave everything to you in your own name, which is what would happen if you didn't have a will or you only had a really basic will, then all of a sudden you're loaded up with assets in a high risk bankruptcy occupation, and you've either got to wear that risk and it undermines all the good work you've done, or you've got to spend money, tax and stamp duty and legal fees to transfer them out again. So it's trying to say that it's actually harder for business people to get their estate planning done. It's not. It's just more important. And if you get your estate plan sorted, then you can make sure those assets pass in the right environment to keep your asset protection strategies going without undermining all the good work that you've done.
I think that's a really good point, because you speak to business owners and say, look, you're working so hard, you're growing this business, you've got a large amount of money, you've set it up right, that you've got a company, as you said, maybe transfer the house into the other partner's name. And then you say, well, what happens if one of your other business partner passes away? Or what happens if the worst happens to this person? And they go, oh, shit, I didn't think of that. And as you said, all their hard work, everything they've built up can just get lost, basically, or lose to tax and legal fees.
Yeah, and like estate planning is really just about having your hard-earned wealth go to the right people at the right time. And what we mean by the right people is your loved ones, your friends, your families or charities that are important to you, not to the government through unnecessary taxes. If you do your estate planning properly, there should be no tax or no stamp duty when you have the assets moving to your loved ones. But if you do it poorly and it doesn't achieve the objectives, you end up paying heaps more tax and stamp duty. Or if there's a dispute, you end up just paying lawyers. So like a lot of litigation lawyers will say, oh, just go and get a post office will, because they know it's going to end up in a dispute and it won't achieve the right thing, and then they'll be there to get all the legal fees sorting out the dispute.
Because that's obviously where they make their money when it comes to dispute time.
Exactly. Whereas if you just spend a little bit of time and get the right people to help you with the estate plan up front, it's just a smooth, streamlined process. It doesn't cost that much to get it done, particularly compared to, if you think about the legal bills for a disputed will can run in the hundreds of thousands.
Jesus.
Like, you just think, why not spend a little bit more than a post office will to get it done properly at the beginning, and then you don't have that money wasted. Another thing I just wanted to touch on, you said before about people who are in business with other people. So that's really important to think about what happens with your share of the business if you pass away, or your business partner's share of the business, because you may not want to be in business with your partner's spouse.
Yeah, definitely.
You might, which is cool, but a lot of people, I think, wouldn't. So, for instance, particularly if it's like a manufacturing business, you may not want the wife suddenly being involved and having a seat at the table and disrupting the arrangements. And a lot of people work on handshakes and they've just got a good arrangement and they know how they've done business for years together. And that if you've got a spouse or even children, your business partner's children coming in, all of that goes out the window. So it can be easily avoided by having a proper shareholders agreement, and sometimes a document that we call an insurance funded buy-sell. Now we don't have to go into the nitty-gritty of that, but basically it just means you have some insurance funding there so that you can easily buy out the estate of the business partner who's died, so that you don't have to come up and scratch around to find this extra funding to buy them out.
Sure.
And you can just get on with running the business with as little impact as possible.
So that's a really interesting one about the partnerships, and it's something that I've seen happen, and obviously the conversations that we have with clients. And you talk to them and say, do you know what will happen? What I said before, do you know what will happen if you pass away to your partnership, to your business? And they said, yeah, it'll just like continue. And I was like, well, no, your wife or your husband is going to step in and they're going to be partners with your partner. And exactly what you're saying, do you want that? Do you get along with each other? Will the business still run smoothly? Chances are it won't. And a lot of people just don't think about that, because obviously she'll be right. I'm not going to die. Everything's going to be okay. It's scary.
Exactly. And when you've got a business that really relies on the personal exertion of the partners, and it's all just sort of been handshake, and you get on fine as partners, and you have, or anything you resolve easily, it's easy to think, oh, I don't need to bother. But once you throw other people in the mix, it's a totally different dynamic, and the value of the business can be eroded so quickly. Once you have those issues. It's just an absolute distraction that no one needs.
On top of, obviously, the partner passing away. As you said, there's the emotional and then there's the financial.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So if we try and bust some myths around estate planning, and especially myths around young people and estate planning, we've maybe covered off a few of these, but one excuse that I hear when I talk to especially friends and clients about getting their estate planning sorted is they say, I'm too young, it's only for old people. And we've touched on it already, but just bust that one for me.
Oh, look, everybody needs a will, really, once you turn 18. Now, your will at 18 might be super simple, but it's a good idea to have one. And for instance, like I'd take myself, I don't have children, so I go, oh, well, why would I need a will? But I have nieces and nephews and siblings, and I really want to make sure that my inheritance that I leave to my family goes, to my nieces and nephews in the appropriate structure. If my brother, touch wood, does end up going through a relationship breakdown, I don't want the money that I've left him for my nieces and nephews to be caught up in their divorce proceedings. And even, because again, once you're going through a divorce, it's the lawyers who are getting most of the money. So it's still important to have that certainty and peace of mind that the money that you've worked hard for goes to the right people. And there's also charities that, if I'm not here, I'd like to support. So the government will that they give you doesn't deal with that. So it's a good idea just to get it written down. Everyone knows who's in charge, where the assets go. It's a pretty straightforward process. And, I probably won't have to touch it for years until I have children.
Yeah, definitely. So, again, maybe we've already touched on it, but I don't have any assets. Why would I bother?
Well, look, most people do. If you've had a job, you have assets, because you'll have a little bit of super. You might have more super, it depends. But you'll have life insurance that goes with that. So you will have some assets. Even if we're not talking sheep stations, you might as well have those assets go to your family and loved ones or charities than to the government through taxes. And what you really need is your powers of attorney sorted. So if you can't look after yourself, whether that's for a short amount of time or a longer ongoing period because you're in an accident or something like that, you need to have the right people charged with managing your financial affairs so that they can manage it, so there's enough funding for you. And that's where insurance I think is really important for young people. So I don't sell insurance, that's your thing, but I think that goes hand in hand with having TPD and trauma insurance and income protection as well, so that if something does happen, you're not a burden on your family. And if your family is dealing with you having lost capacity because of illness or an accident, the last thing they want to do is spend time with lawyers trotting off to the Civil Appeals Tribunal trying to get an order about who's able to make decisions for you, or dealing with the internal bureaucracy with the bank, the insurance companies, the hospital, proving that they're able to make decisions for you.
Yeah.
One piece of paper just takes all that white noise away to nominate who's going to sort things out for you. And I think it's really important, not only doing it for your family so they've got less hassle sorting it out for you, but do it for yourself, because you might recover. And if you've had people who you didn't want making your decisions, and then you've got to live with those decisions, it may actually not be the right outcome for you. And then you're going, oh, well, you sold my apartment, or you put me through this treatment that I would never have chosen. Yeah. So the power of attorney, I think, is really important for young people.
Definitely. It's always my recommendation, regardless if you don't want to take up a will, a power of attorney is absolutely non-negotiable.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably one of the, adding on to that in terms of myths, speaking to parents that have 18-year-old plus children, you say, well, if something happened to your child, do you know that you're not legally able to take care of them? Or you need, as you said, you need to go to the civil tribunals and get appointed. And it's a shock to them, because they think, well, I'm the parent. If my son's in hospital, I can take care of him. I can make those decisions. You say, well, no, you can't. He's over 18. He's not a dependent anymore.
Yeah, and what if there's a spouse who is, may or may not be a de facto, or, they're not married, it's not clear who's entitled, and then they've got different ideas.
Yeah.
It can just cause a huge amount of heartache when you've got competing people with different views.
That probably leads on to another really interesting topic that I have with a lot of young couples. So that de facto, definition of de facto, that's probably, I'm not sure if it's your area of specialty, but that's a big one that I come across. When you talk to people that aren't married, they're living together, and potentially they look at buying a house together, that just rings alarm bells for me.
Oh, absolutely. Get it sorted. So the de facto, once you've been living together for 2 years, but also if you have children together, then you're de factos. And there's other criteria where you can be de factos earlier based on the sort of support and relationship nature.
Yeah.
And that can get quite messy, because under the intestacy rules, if you have a spouse, which includes de facto, then some of your assets go to them, and that may be good or that may not be good depending on where you're at in your relationship. But also, if say you do want it to go to your de facto and the family doesn't want that to happen, then your de facto is there trying to prove the relationship. And having, if they've lost their partner, and then the de facto is there trying to say, well, no, we are de factos, and having to do statements about the intimate life details. What was just a mess. Don't leave it up to everyone to fight over. If you did a will, it just becomes a null point.
Yeah.
Another thing I might just mention, even if you have got a spouse and, say a partner and you're married and you've got children and you don't have a will at all, what happens on intestacy? Not everything just goes to the spouse. The house does, and then the first portion of assets, but the children actually receive half of the balance of the estate. Or if you've got 2 children, they'll get 2/3 of it.
So it's a set formula, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that's, as you talked about, having the default, that X amount will go to your spouse, and then X amount will go to each of your children.
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not. You've
Correct.
got no choice.
So if you're the surviving spouse and all of a sudden your 2 children are sitting on a couple of $100,000 each, which you'll control until they turn 18 anyway, or 21, sorry. But then, that money can only be used for them. And if you need that money to do other things, like pay off the mortgage or sit in your offset or invest, you don't have that option. It's crazy when you've got 5-year-olds sitting on a couple of $100,000 because the will wasn't done properly. Yeah. And then when they turn 21, it is their money. And you might have needed that money for your retirement.
Yeah.
So there's no way you'd want to rely on the intestacy rules.
And I think the last kind of myth or probably the barrier for people getting a will is it costs too much. I don't have them. I can't afford it. What would you say about that?
There's different ways that you can fund the estate planning. So I would suggest working with your financial advisor, so someone like you, Russ, because there's options out there for the financial advisors to get it sorted for you in a manner that's pretty good value.
Sure.
They can also help you if part of it can be funded through your superannuation. They can help with letting you know about that aspect of it, and not all of it can, but some of it can sometimes. So that helps because you're not you're paying for it, but it's out of your super, so it doesn't feel quite out of your pocket.
Definitely.
But it's like insurance. The cost of getting your estate planning sorted now it's just so much cheaper than if you don't get it done and something goes wrong, which usually it will go wrong if you haven't got a proper estate plan. So spend a little bit of money now to save hundreds and thousands if you need it.
Now, if we take a step away from the technical estate planning, wills and power of attorney side of things, probably a little bit more lighthearted, let the listeners know a little bit about you. So who is Tara Lucke?
So I work as a lawyer. I live on the Gold Coast, so up the road from your office. I moved here in November 2016, so a little bit over a year now, and I absolutely love it. So I was in Brisbane before that and was just kind of itching to be outside a lot more and closer to nature. So I'm really loving, I've taken up surfing. Still not.
How's that going?
Poorly. It's so difficult. I wish I had learnt as a child. There's so much that needs to happen before you're even standing up. But I'm getting a lot better. But I just nice and easy, cruisy surfing days. But surfing, I've learnt to skateboard, which is hilarious. But
a little bit more dangerous than just the surfing.
But it's good for my hand-eye coordination. I love being out here at the beach. So I'm a lawyer with a firm called View Legal, which I'm one of the founders of. So we've been going since 2014. And we're a little bit different to normal law firms. So me and the other founders are really passionate about doing law differently and basically being the kind of law firm that we would want our friends to use, because I think lawyers generally are out of touch and arrogant, and it's not accessible for most people to get quality legal solutions, which we're setting out to change. So we look at how to use technology, automation, and just different ways of doing business to make sure that people, for instance, can get a quality estate plan that's affordable. Because everyone needs one, and in the past it just hasn't been accessible.
Definitely. So that changed from living in Brisbane and you were working at a large law firm, McCulloch Robertson, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So I spent about 8 years at McCulloch Robertson, so was working there while I was still at uni, and then did my graduate and the whole way through. So all of us at View Legal we're working together at McCulloch Robertson. And we decided that it was a long decision actually, but we are the private client team at McCulloch Robertson, whereas most of the lawyers there are working for big end corporates, listed resource companies, that type of thing, where the CFOs are approving the legal spend, but we're actually working for private clients, or real people who have to pay their own legal bills, and we just wanted to do business differently, and that was a bit hard in a firm the size of McCulloch's. It's a great firm. We were all there for a really, really long time, but just trying to get a different set of systems and processes in a firm that size was difficult. And we kind of got to the point where I was saying, well, look, it's actually not fair to ask for a different set of processes for a team of 15 when the 500 other people in the firm are working on a different process. So we decided to leave and set up View Legal. So View Legal, we don't have an office. Everybody works remotely. So I've been location independent since 2014. Great. Yeah, it's been really great. It has its challenges.
Sure.
I think it's been good for me because I was already quite like I'd been a lawyer for about 8 years by that time.
Yeah.
So I had connections. I had in my sort of more junior years, I'd had the support of such a big organisation with the resources and connections and the training, so that when we left, I had relationships and I didn't feel quite as isolated.
Yep.
I think it's harder for early career lawyers or professionals when you are working location independent, and you have to really make sure that you work on that side of it.
Definitely.
So I loved the flexibility. It can be isolating at times, so I think I make a conscious effort to get out and about and still meet with people, but it has been great for work-life balance. It has also been not so great for work-life balance because no one tells you to go home.
Just switch off. Yeah.
You're already at home and switching off and that type of thing. So it's for me, it's been great. I know it doesn't work for everybody, and I think you have to, there's its own unique challenges that you have to be alert to.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So I think the number one question that you must get when you tell someone you're a lawyer and you worked in the city in Brisbane and you're working for a big firm was how much of it is like Suits?
None of it.
None of it?
A tiny bit. I think I became like a graduate in 2008, which was just around when the GFC hit.
Yep.
I think pre-GFC it was a bit more like Suits.
Okay.
But no, and I always feel inadequate when I watch Suits because I'm not a litigator. Like I don't do.
You're not driving Ferraris and wearing $1 million suits.
No, and also like I don't do litigation and I don't do conflict either. That's the part I really love about my area of law. So I just do like estate planning, obviously, asset protection, like business structuring, tax, business succession, super and trust. So that probably sounds so boring, but I really like it because there's no fighting.
Yep.
And it's all about either helping people get peace of mind, or if they want a project and they want to know how best to structure something, I'll just help them optimize their structure, taking advantage of what's best from a tax perspective, asset protection, succession.
Yeah.
So it's really nice. You get to work with great people who are doing interesting things. And like with litigation, your clients don't want to be talking to you. They don't want to be involved in litigation. Yeah. They're not happy that they're even in the process. It's just, I find that emotional stress, I'm not cut out for it. Okay. I take on all my clients' issues and worry about it. So I'm not hard enough
more
to be a Suits
empathetic lawyer.
I think so. So I like the more technically dry stuff because it just the human element to the work, how you apply it,
definitely
is really fulfilling.
Yeah, and obviously not being a 60-year-old grey-haired suit-wearing lawyer has its perks. When you have that, you can have that personality and you can actually have that human conversation. Yeah,
exactly. And everyone I work with are just people trying to do their best in their business or get their affairs sorted. And we're just real people trying to help each other out. So there's not a lot of ego or that the glamorous side of it from Suits. Yeah,
definitely. And what advice would you give to any young lawyers that are maybe following that similar career path that I'm sure you were on for 8 years, saying, all right, I've got to get to that next level, I've got to become that senior associate, I've got to become partner, working that way up. You've obviously taken a very different path and taken that whole step back and gained probably some, as you said, work-life balance. What advice would you give to someone that's maybe in that position, that having those feelings that you were having?
Yeah, good question. So being a lawyer, it's a really interesting time to be in the legal industry because I feel like it's going through this transition phase. So look, maybe when I started, just as the industry as a whole, when I started as a lawyer, and probably years before that, it was like a seller's market. So lawyers could charge whatever they wanted. They could get away with being arrogant, not client-centric. They charge, and they still do, on the hour, which at View Legal, we don't have timesheets. We don't charge on the hour. Everything's upfront fixed pricing. And for me, that's just a non-negotiable. Don't have hourly rates. I don't understand how law firms can still do that. No other industry really charges like that. But those types of historical features of being in the legal industry are being eroded, and there's a lot of competition and different expressions of being a lawyer that, there's no one traditional way of being a lawyer in a big firm. So I just say you don't have to just get a job in a big firm to be a success as a lawyer. There's so many different ways that lawyers are involved and different expressions of being a lawyer. In terms of if you are finding yourself in a role where you are trying to climb the corporate ladder, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I heard that when I was a grad, and I was like, yeah, fine. But I did end up getting a lot of burnout. I worked a huge amount of hours, and at first I loved it. For about maybe 6 years, I loved it, and I was happy to devote that much time of my life to my job.
And how many hours, just to give listeners an example?
I reckon I worked maybe 14 hours a day, but I tried not to work on the weekends.
Tried.
I wasn't I didn't work every weekend, but I'd have to if I
needed to.
Yeah. I mean, those kinds of organisations reward people who are performing highly by giving them even more work. But that was really good for me because I did learn a lot, and I felt like I did accelerate my career, which was good. But I reached a point where it wasn't making me happy anymore, and I felt like it took me a long time to realise that, and I felt like I was too deep to extract myself out of it. So I'd say the last couple of years I've been experimenting with trying to find a way to be a lawyer that suits me. So I definitely reached a point where I was just sick of working all the time, and I wanted to learn how to surf and just have time to enjoy the beautiful Gold Coast. I thought moving to the Gold Coast would maybe make me feel a bit happier because I was still working really long hours when I moved here, and it in fact did the opposite because all the beautiful tempting things were actually right under my nose, and I still didn't have time to do them. I was like, I'll get up early and go stand up paddleboarding, but then I didn't have time because I was just too stressed out, working too many hours to do it. So I decided to step down, and now I'm a freelancer for View Legal and have time to do that type of thing and just enjoy life, which suits me at the moment. And I might be... The other thing is your career is it is a marathon. It's a really long time. So if you take a bit of time, you don't have to be a partner as soon as possible. If you take a bit of time to reflect on what success means to you. I was a partner of a law firm, and then I realised that wasn't actually my definition of success, or I got there and then I was like, oh, this doesn't feel like success. I'm not even 30. I'm working crazy hours. I keep having relationship breakdowns because I'm so stressed out. My health is deteriorating. This is meant to be the pinnacle, but it does not feel good. I don't feel successful. So it took me a long time to work out, well, what does success actually mean, and take a bit of the ego out of it. And I'm not saying I've got friends who are the other founders of View Legal, that is success for them, and it's really good. It's everyone's unique idea of what's important to them. So I think with law it can be easy to just get on the train tracks and follow the path, the defined path, and other people's definition of success. But with technology, automation, outsourcing, there's a lot of different ways to being a successful lawyer, and I would encourage people who are in law or thinking about getting into law, just to really test what is going to be the best expression of that for themselves.
Definitely. I think that's a great point to finish on. Finding the definition of success means to you is, I think, a universal kind of great thing to do, regardless of where you are at the moment. Because as you said, law is a good example. I've got quite a few friends that are lawyers, that there's that set path, which if you don't do anything differently, that's the path that you're going to be chasing. And for you to say that you got there and then it wasn't for you, but it is for other people, like, I think that's a great point.
Yeah, like I was on that path and I didn't actually take time on the way through to really check in that it was the right path for me.
Yeah.
And with hindsight, maybe I would have done that differently, but it's all been great learning.
Definitely. Excellent. So where can people get in touch with you?
Well, I have quite a lot of the social media going. So I'm on LinkedIn under Tara Lucke, that's Lucke.
Yep.
I'm on Facebook under Tara Lucke Legal. I'm on Instagram at Tara Lucke Legal. And I'm also on Twitter at Tara Lucke Legal.
So if you want some legal tips, I recommend that you follow Tara on Instagram. There's some great videos on there. And soon to be YouTube channel?
Yes.
Excellent.
So that's at the moment I've just been doing like short 1-minute clips of little tips and tricks, but hoping to get that a bit more evolved into longer content on the YouTube.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks very much for being on the Young Money Podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks, Ross.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the Young Money Podcast, make sure you subscribe to keep up to date with all the latest episodes. And feel free to leave a like, comment, and share it with a friend.